from wherever in the world you're joining us. My name is Chris Bortlik. I'm a principal architect at the Microsoft Technology Center in Boston, Massachusetts, the United States. Really excited to be joining you all today. Really appreciate everyone joining the session. I'm joined by my good friend Adrian here in the room. So again, really appreciate you, Adrian, joining in the room. My colleague Ajay and others are on the line as well. But again, we'll try to make this as interactive as we can with a remote meeting with 60 plus of our closest friends online. So if you do have questions throughout the session, feel free to use the raise hand feature in Teams. Put some questions in the chat. Ajay and Adrian will be monitoring the chat and let me know if anything big comes up there. I do have some time allocated at the end for additional Q&A as well. So before we jump in, how many of you are using Microsoft Syntex, or formerly known as SharePoint Syntex today? If you don't mind, just use the raise hand feature just so I can get an idea of how many of you are familiar with what SharePoint Syntex, now Microsoft Syntex, is. Nobody. Okay, there's one. Thanks, Leon. Okay, well, great. So this session is really a bit of an introduction to certainly SharePoint Syntex and Microsoft Syntex, but we'll be talking about it in the context of a scenario, really focused around contract management. So as I mentioned, I work for the Microsoft Technology Centers. We are a worldwide organization. There are over 40 technology centers globally. And if you want to learn more about us, you can visit microsoft.com/MTC, but we work with some of our largest, most strategic enterprise customers and partners across the world. So today we're going to talk about a little bit about certainly the contract management scenario, but we're going to do a bit of a grounding on SharePoint Syntex, now Microsoft Syntex. We'll talk a bit about the different types of models that are there. We'll spend a good amount of time going through the contract management scenario. So at the MTC, we like to go through scenarios and use cases that are relevant that might touch multiple parts of the Microsoft Cloud. So in our case, we'll have a scenario that focused on taking a contract in, getting processed through Microsoft Syntex, but then using workflow and automation through Power Automate to actually post things into Microsoft Teams to actually have an end-to-end real-world business scenario. Tons of announcements yesterday and then today around roadmap related to Microsoft Syntex. So I'll cover off on some of that at the end, and then some resources. And as I mentioned, we'll have time at the end for additional Q&A. So as Adrian knows, I've been working in the SharePoint space for, I hate to say it, over 20 years. Adrian and I have been working about the same amount of time. Yeah, so I feel like I'm always dating myself, and I had much more hair when I started off, and I don't know if it's because of SharePoint or the 4 kids that I now have, but SharePoint and other enterprise content management systems over the years, you think about the traditional life cycle of content. Typically content gets created. Often, more times than not, content gets classified today, and typically when documents get classified, there's typically usually at least 3 reasons from my experience. One is for search and discovery, so people can get back to the content, they can find it and reuse it. Second is often for security, making sure the content is labeled and classified for the right purpose for security and compliance. May also be for retention as the third reason, to make sure data destruction is done as well. So we're going to talk about how Microsoft Syntex can help with that. But we're also going to talk about oftentimes extracting metadata. And one of the challenges we've often experienced is asking people to tag content, whether it's certainly using term sets or using required metadata, or maybe using folder-based metadata defaults. But typically one of the biggest challenges has been asking or requiring end users to properly tag the content. So hopefully we're going to show you how we can leverage Syntex to help with the tagging and extraction of metadata, to also drive the assignment of a label, not just for security purposes, information protection, but also for retention purposes as well. Ultimately, we want to make it easier for people to find and search and filter the content so they can reuse it, which feeds into knowledge discovery. And hopefully really the holy grail of knowledge management, ideally, is content reuse. So Adrian might be working on a great document. How do I find that and discover that, assuming I have the right rights to it? So I'm not reinventing the wheel, recreating content over and over, so that we can actually, again, get value out of that. And it's not just taking the content, but it's looking at the metadata that might come out of the content and potentially reusing that metadata to drive additional business processes. So maybe driving a workflow, maybe building another document, doing document assembly, document creation that might be based off of the metadata that we extracted. So as folks have certainly experienced over the years, SharePoint has been our enterprise content management platform and web content management platform. But SharePoint has evolved significantly since back in 2001 when a number of us got started with the platform. SharePoint, in fact, today powers many of the enterprise content management services across the Microsoft cloud. So when you use OneDrive for Business, that is powered by SharePoint on the back end. Services like Microsoft Stream for video are now powered by SharePoint on the back end. Microsoft Teams, when you're creating a channel or uploading files, whether they're one-to-one files in a chat or in a group where a group of people are collaborating, that's all inside of SharePoint. If someone's doing a call on Teams like we're doing, and the meeting is being recorded as this is being done, that meeting recording actually gets stored inside of Microsoft SharePoint under the covers as well. So SharePoint is still there. It's driving and powering a number of experiences, Microsoft Viva and other things as well. Certainly we're doing more and more with ingesting and working with third-party content, certainly working with things like the Microsoft Graph and Graph connectors to bring in content from outside of Office 365, working with partners like ServiceNow and other content sources that can then be fed into what we call the Microsoft Graph, that can be then surfaced through Microsoft Search. But Microsoft Syntex is really building upon what we announced over 2 years ago. If folks might remember, a few years back, we announced something called Project Cortex. And Project Cortex became realized as two products. The first one was called SharePoint Syntex at the time, really focused around document extraction from structured documents and unstructured documents, and I'll talk a bit more about those in a little bit. The second part became what has been now known as Microsoft Viva Topics. So thinking about identifying who knows what about what and building these pages and then starting to surface the topics inside of different places, starting off inside of SharePoint and Microsoft Search. And over time, it's showing up more and more inside of Outlook, in Yammer, in Teams, things like Viva Engage and some of the other announcements we made recently. So Microsoft Syntex is the new brand that we announced yesterday during Satya Nadella's keynote. And Microsoft Syntex is building upon the foundation of what has been SharePoint Syntex, but adding additional capabilities that you'll see start rolling out over the next few months. Today's session is going to focus a lot around the first box, which is around the enhance phase, really understanding the content that's there, assembling content. Certainly, we've had the ability to connect through things like search for discovery and content reuse, but I'm also really excited about the investments we're making around managing. So certainly, we've had things like classifying and labeling documents for information protection or retention policies. Again, that can be driven based off of the content that we extract and classify through Syntex. But as we kind of build this out, we're looking beyond that. So in the enhanced part of Microsoft Syntex, we're looking beyond just extracting and tagging and indexing content. We're looking at doing things around annotation, document translation, the ability to actually look at a document and give a summary of what might be included inside of that document. And I'll have a quick little screenshot, a little animated video that will kind of show you that. The Connect pillar, which we're not going to spend as much time on today, is building upon investments we've been making around Microsoft Search and the Microsoft Graph. And you'll continue to see investments we're making around improving search and discovery. We made a huge announcement yesterday about some electronic signature capabilities that are coming native to Microsoft Syntex as a first-party offering, but continue to work with partners like Adobe and DocuSign on their e-signature solutions as well, and bringing those directly into the Microsoft 365 platform. I'm going to talk about an example around contract management. We're also looking at examples around other common processes like accounts payable. And then more and more looking at connecting your content to other business critical applications outside of Microsoft 365. In the manage pillar, it's certainly things we've done around lifecycle, around certainly tagging and labeling content for retention policies and security, but also thinking about things we haven't really done as much natively within Microsoft 365 in the past. So things like tiered storage, where maybe we want to archive certain content. We want to remove that from kind of the hot storage, if you would, in Microsoft 365 and move it to another tier of lower storage. That might be a little more cost effective. Thinking about things around ransomware protection, above and beyond the things we've had in the past with just the first stage recycle bin and the second stage recycle bin inside of SharePoint and OneDrive. So a lot of announcements we've made there. And at the end of this presentation, I actually have a roadmap slide that will talk through a little bit more around each of these areas. And there's other sessions happening this week at Ignite, whether live or on demand. We can catch up on more on that as well. So in the enhanced phase, which is where we're going to talk about today, As I mentioned, we've had the ability for a while with SharePoint Syntex to understand tag content based on artificial intelligence and document processing. So I'm going to spend more time on that after this. I won't talk about it much right now, but it's building upon other parts of the Microsoft Cloud. Things we've been doing inside of Azure for a while around forms processing, things we've then brought into the Power Platform, things like AI Builder and some of those pre-built models and templates. But as I mentioned, this is going to extend even further into doing things around translating of content, the ability to use artificial intelligence to generate a summary of a document, to understand the key points of the document. So think about a really large document, maybe a large statement of work or a large legal brief. If we had the ability to actually have the AI read through the document and give us a quick summary of what it thinks are the highlights and key points. I'm going to show you an example around content assembly. We're actually building a document off of a template, but imagine scaling that out to be able to generate a lot of documents en masse. So before I joined Microsoft 14 years ago, I spent 14 years as a customer working in industries like financial services. So think about contract generation, policy generation, other documents where we might have a template, we might have document metadata we've extracted or other document sources that say, this is the customer, these are the terms and conditions, run that through this engine to automatically generate the documents, taking the document template and taking that data and actually generating that almost like a mail merge on steroids, if you would. And then lastly, doing additional things to work on optical character recognition or OCR to again, extract things from images, as well as doing more and more with automatic video transcription. So think about, again, Microsoft Stream being built on top of SharePoint now and storing the meetings, certainly the meeting recordings from Teams, but other video content inside of SharePoint, and then having the ability to look at that video and look at the processing, look at the transcription, not just looking at it in English, but across 28 different languages as well. So here's a quick little example around the document summarization that will be coming. So in this case, we have an invitation to bid, so responding to an RFI, request for information. And then Syntex has gone out and it's actually reviewed the file and it's actually extracted out some information that it thinks are relevant. So who's the overview, what's going on, and when I click into certain parts, it actually jumps to the part in the document that it thinks might be relevant for me to actually get more information about that without a human having to, in this case, scan and read a 12-page document. So Microsoft Syntex, if you think about the heritage of SharePoint Syntex over the last few years and where Viva Topics is, you think about machine learning and artificial intelligence. So traditionally, as you look at artificial intelligence, conventional machine learning, you might have needed a large amount of content. And typically in that fashion, the artificial intelligence identifies patterns. And it might apply a tag. You might have an expert that goes through and reviews and approves the model to kind of give it some reinforcement kind of learning. So the best example I often use is I have 4 daughters, as Adrian knows. As my daughters have aged over the years, I might do positive reinforcement when they do something well. They behave nicely, they did well in school, they might get a little extra time on Netflix or the Xbox. Maybe they fought with their sister, they did something they shouldn't have. So I get to make a negative reinforcement, right, to hopefully discourage that behavior. So think about things again like Viva Topics as an example. The model, the engine goes out, it reviews information, it classifies it, it makes recommendations, and a human goes in and says, this is relevant or not relevant, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. SharePoint Syntex works along the concept really around machine teaching. So whereas with conventional machine learning, we needed large amounts of documents, with machine teaching, we can actually bring 5 or 10 different documents. A human can go in and actually review and say, well, here's an invoice or a purchase order, and this is a number of documents that look like this. Here's where you find the invoice, the purchase number, the customer name. The artificial intelligence goes through and tags that. And again, a human reviews it. It understands the confidence level, how confident is the engine, that it can accurately identify that. And then as new content comes in, it reviews it and it tags it and it gives it a confidence score. So for SharePoint Syntex and Microsoft Syntex, we're going to talk about today, we're going to focus on what's called a document understanding model. So document understanding model looks at unstructured documents. Think about a contract. Think about a statement of work. Often those are in PDFs. Those are in a Word document. They may not be as well formed as an invoice or a purchase order. Now these models, there's a special site template, a special site collection in Syntex called the Content Center. The Content Center is where the models live. And then ultimately, as you define and create a model, you can drive content compliance. So you can say when a new document is tagged as a contract, that document might be classified as company confidential. So apply an information protection label. That label could have a header, a footer, a watermark, and encryption policy on it. We can also assign a retention label. So if something is classified as a contract, it might get marked as company confidential initially, and maybe have a retention policy that says we will keep the document for 5 years from the date it was last created or modified. So again, driving automatic content compliance around information protection and retention policies as well. Now, Syntex has, as I mentioned, 2 different types of models. Document understanding is the example I just talked about. That's what we're going to focus on today around contract and contract management. One of the benefits of a document understanding model is we can essentially create the model in one place, and that model can be reused across multiple document libraries. Forms processing, we're not going to spend as much time on today. Forms processing is built upon the foundation of the Power Platform and things like AI Builder, where we have some pre-built models for things like receipts, and we're adding others over time around expenses and other things. You can build your own custom models. So a classic example, again, is maybe a very well-structured document. So if you send out a lot of purchase orders or you send out invoices, those are typically well-structured, well-formed. You can create different collections of documents. So this is a standard type of purchase order for this product line. Another key thing that we're not going to talk much about today is we work with a number of different companies that might have content that today may not be digital. It might be paper-based content. It might be an email. It might be in a fax. So we work with partners like Fujitsu, as an example, that actually have scanners that can scan and ingest the content, bring that into Office 365, and then that content can be analyzed and processed as well. So again, we're going to focus a lot on content that's already digital, but just know that this same process, the same concept, could apply to documents that today might be an email, might be faxes, might be paper, because yes, paper still exists, as more and more of our customers say. And again, I came from an insurance and financial services background, work with a lot of government customers and other industries. Yeah, so as much as the last couple of years, we've tried to move away from paper for a variety of reasons, especially when we're all working from home or working remote. But even as we're coming back into the office, many of us are working in different locations, and some might be in the office on different days or different office locations. There still is a need around digitizing paper-based content as well. So the scenario we're going to talk through that's going to drive the demonstration we think is a pretty common and practical use case. So the scenario is we might be working with contracts. Now, we work with a number of great partners that work around contract management systems. This is not to say we are a full end-to-end contract management platform, but this is a pretty common use case and scenario. We do have a contract management site template that I'll show you later on, but it's not meant to compete with a number of our partners that are building full end-to-end contract management solutions. But in this example, assume we have a document library that's been created, that a person is uploading a document. We're going to use Microsoft Syntex to analyze and scan the document. So we'll understand and hopefully classify the document correctly, promote and extract metadata as part of that. That metadata, whether it's the client name, the contractor name, the fee amount, will get promoted as metadata in the document library. We'll then have a Power Automate workflow that is listening for an event to identify when new content has been classified. Based on that, it will use the metadata to then actually route that contract for review and approval. Now, the way we chose to do this is to have the workflow post a message to a team that's set up for contract management, post an adaptive card that's there. Again, it's a Power Automate workflow, so you can send it via email, you can send it as a private chat, you can set up, again, a multi-stage review process where it has to go through multiple people and multiple levels. This is just a very basic example, kind of an art of the possible, if you would. But ultimately, someone goes through, they review, they approve it, notification is done, and then when we're done, we actually, okay, if this contract's been approved, we're going to go ahead and send it out for payment. So we might post that information, in my case, to a Microsoft list, but in the real world, maybe sending it to a SQL database or an Oracle database, some other system to actually do that. And then what I've added on the back end is once that contract has been approved, we can actually leverage the data from that payout list to actually use a document template to create a document that we send back to the person that sent the contract to say, it's been approved for this amount. So again, someone doesn't have to manually take that information and generate the notification that's going out. So with that, I'm going to pause a second. Adrian or Jay, any questions in the queue yet?
Nothing in the chat yet.
Okay, great.
Oh, we have one that just came through.
All right, I feel like I'm on a telephone here, Adrian. Do you want to read for me what's in the queue?
It's a question, okay for me to name names?
If they're okay, sure.
Question from Kim. Are there any other document types that have been tested with this model, such as resumes, test plans, requirements, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kim. So you can build your own model, and I'm going to show you an example of that, where you bring in documents that are examples or positive examples of things that match that model type, and then you bring in negative examples. So a number of customers have built things beyond just contract management. Your mileage may vary based on the initial accuracy, based on the training set and the data and how well you can build the rules that are there. But certainly this expands beyond just a contract management example or a statement of work or other things. So great question, Kim. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to break out and I'm going to do a demonstration here. So what you're seeing here, let me zoom in a little bit. This is something that we call our experience platform, that is a consistent platform that all 40 plus technology centers worldwide leverage. So this is not a real production environment that's here. It's running in first release or targeted release. So everything I'm going to show you are things that are generally available today. Hey, Steve. Steve's one of our global black belts on the line as well. So thanks, Steve, for jumping in there too. So as we go in, I'm going to go ahead and look at an example where I'm going to upload a brand new service agreement. So I'm just going to go out and I'm going to upload a file. So here is one that is for Christy. So as I bring this document in to this document library, you notice that we're using some conditional formatting. So you can see that this document for Christy has been uploaded in the library. And you notice right now it's telling me that Syntex is reviewing and processing the document. Let me go into one just to show you an example, one that's already been processed. So here is one for Alan. So what you see here is that this is a consulting agreement. Again, pretty traditional document. In this case, it's inside of a Word document. And, it has standard verbiage and it's a pretty consistent format as far as, things we can look for to say, who's the contractor, who's the client, what are the term amounts, and things of that nature. So inside of here, it's going to take a little bit for it to process the model, process the document. But once it does this, we'll come back to it. You'll see that we're going to extract the client name, the contractor name, the fee amount, and then the date, and just showing the date that it's classified. Now, this is a choice in terms of the columns I'm choosing to show and promote here as well. If I go in and look at the library itself and I look at the automation, I can see which model, which SharePoint Syntex model has been applied to this document library. So you can see that I'm leveraging the service agreement model. It was last modified September 30th when I was doing a little testing here. I can see other models that might have already been created in the organization that might be available to me to look at and potentially apply to these libraries as well. So while that's processing, you can see that Christie's document actually went through and it's actually got changed from being new to being in review. So you see, as I was talking there, it extracted the client name of Contoso, the contractor name, the fee amount, and again, you're seeing that the data was classified was less than a minute ago. So I'm here on Eastern time, so 3:22 was about, again, 30 seconds ago here Eastern time. So let me show you a little bit about the model that is used behind this. So I'm going to pop over into our content center first. So as I mentioned, this is a site collection template that comes for organizing and storing the models that have been created. What I've done is I've gone ahead and already opened up the model that I created for the services agreement. So the first thing that I did, and I'm not going to build the model on the fly if you live, I'm going to use the, Adrian, I know you're big into cooking, the Julia Child kind of cooking show. So this is one that's already come out of the oven. So this is a model that's here. So in this case, I gave it a number of documents that I use for training. So I used, if I zoom in here, different documents for Deborah and Christy and Alan. I also uploaded one with this N prefix as a negative example, because I wanted to train it with positive examples of what this model should be looking for, as well as potential negative examples of things that don't look like it. I went in and I said that this model should be available and assigned to my finance website in my services agreement document library. The other thing I could do, which I did not do here, is I could actually go in and look at my model settings. And if I wanted to, I could go ahead and I could apply sensitivity label. So this is getting back into that classification for security purposes. So I could say any new contracts could be, company confidential or maybe only available to employees, so FTEs. And if I wanted to, this is where I could decide to apply a retention policy. So again, imagine I could say this might have customer information, and our corporate retention policy is anything classified as having customer information has a 7-year retention policy. So just by the virtue of Syntex looking at the contract, it's identified that this is a contract content type. It's extracted the metadata we care about. It could assign a security information protection label, which again could have encryption, a watermark, a header, a footer, what have you. And it could also assign a retention label that could deal with data destruction as well. Now, if I look at the model itself, you'll notice that I went ahead and I identified what we call these different extractors. So these are basically the columns, the metadata that I want Syntex to review and extract. And you notice here, for the client, I've given it 2 what we call explanations, and I'll show you what that means in a second. But you can also see through the training, Syntex believes it can 100% accurately identify and determine what a client is. So again, that's by me going through and training it, giving it enough examples, going through and actually giving it some coaching and saying, this is where the client name is in this document. And this document, again, that's that reinforcement learning and machine teaching that I'm doing to help Syntex become more and more confident that it can identify it. So I'm going to look at how we identify a client through a client extractor. So you'll see here what I did is I gave it a bunch of different documents, and you can see that it's kind of highlighted what it thinks is the appropriate client for this document. So you can see that for Alan's document, it thinks it's best for you. For Contoso, for Christy rather, the client should be Contoso. And what I basically went through is I went through each of the 7 documents and I said whether or not it was relevant or not. So this negative one, if you can see, actually has no label. That's because it's not actually a valid example of a contract document. I also went through and I built some training rules. So I went through and I identified and said, when you're looking for extracting the contract, it typically has a prefix. So typically the word between or the word between with a semicolon shows up before the client. Now I can say, look, anywhere in the document, I can try to match on capitalization. Maybe I want to only look for letters or numbers based on that. There's other things I can do to say, maybe look at the beginning of the file, the end of the file, or some sort of custom range in between. I also can give it a suffix. So I can say that typically the client name comes after the word between, but before the word of. So there's a pretty consistent format of these contracts or statement of work that might be generated by either our legal department or the company we're often working with. So again, we can give it some hints based on that. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of close that out, and then I did some testing for that. So basically, again, we went through, uploaded some documents, positive examples, negative examples. We identified what we want to extract. We did some training, and we went ahead and did that. The next piece of the puzzle is there was a workflow, as I mentioned. So you should see here. That, again, so you know it's a live demo. You should see that I got a contract request. Again, remember, this is Eastern time, so about 3:23 Eastern. I actually found out in my contract management team that there was a new contract that's pending approval. And here's that metadata again that we had extracted that you saw in that document that got extracted from Syntex. So it's a new request for Contoso. First, he's the contractor. Here's the fee amount. I can view the document. I can go ahead and let's assume I went through and actually looked at it. I can say this looks great. And I'm going to go ahead and use this adaptive card. I'm going to go ahead and click approve. And now the workflow on the back end is going to go ahead and identify that document has been approved, and it's going to progress it through that workflow step. So you can see it's moved to the ready for payout. Now you notice I could go back to SharePoint if I want, but inside of Teams, inside of that channel, you notice I actually have different tabs that are showing directly inside of Teams. So here's that same document library. You'll see that Christie's document has moved to an approved state. You also might notice here that I have a library called for payout. And again, I've done this demo a few times, as you can tell. This was my test this morning. Here's the one we just did. You can actually see in this case, I wrote that out via a workflow. In this case, I just wrote this out into a SharePoint list. Again, could be anything else that Power Automate can connect to. Again, SQL database and Oracle database. But in this case, I'm just writing that information from the workflow into this Microsoft list. So here's that workflow that we had. I'm going to go ahead and just hit refresh here. So again, nothing up my sleeves. You see that workflow just triggered about 7 minutes ago. I can go ahead and look at the last run, but I'm going to go in and show you real quick how the actual workflow got created. So if we go into the workflow in Power Automate, the first thing that you'll see is that the trigger event is that whenever a new file gets classified by SharePoint Syntex or Microsoft Syntex. So whenever something is classified by this content understanding model for this site, for this document library, the first thing we do is we promote the status for that item to be in review. So that's how that document for Christie moved from being new to in review. Then we go ahead and we post an adaptive card over into that team and that general channel, posting information like the client name, the contractor name, and all that. Then basically the workflow sits there and it waits for some sort of response. Remember that adaptive card had an approve button or reject button. So once that document gets approved, so we'll get on that branch, we update the status to be approved. We then go ahead and we create an item in that payout list. So there's that Microsoft list. And then we post back into that, that team. We update the adaptive card to say that document has been reviewed and it's been approved. Now, don't worry about getting all the JSON and all that. This is actually a sample accelerator that we've actually built within Microsoft that's freely available. Actually, a number of our colleagues across Microsoft built this as an example that is freely available for you to download, deploy, and customize as well. So I mentioned, though, that I can move beyond just reviewing a document, just approving it, and just writing information out to a list. We also have the ability to leverage Syntex and leverage a document template. So here's a document that I created to notify someone that their payment's been approved. So I basically took the document, just leveraging Word, and added some tokens in. So I say thank you to the client. Your payment amount for the contractor and the amount of the fee was approved. And the way that this actually gets done today is if I go back to SharePoint, and I go to my payout document library, I went in and I actually created a payment template. So when I click on the payment template, it's going to load up that Word document template that I supplied. So here it is again with those tokens that I showed you earlier. I'm going to go in and I'm going to browse the information from that list. So remember I showed you that Microsoft list. I'm just going to sort it by newest. So you get the latest and greatest. So here's the last run we just did. I'm going to say, okay, it's for Christie. So it's bringing in the contractor name, the payment, the person we're doing it for, the dollar amount. I can give this a name. So I'm going to say Christie Live Night 2022 demo. And then I'm going to go ahead and just say create the document. Now, again, it gives me a prompt to confirm the actual name that's there. I could save it as a document or a PDF. So if I want to make it read only, I could do that as well. I'm going to hit create. And now what it's going to do, again, it's going to take that template. It's going to take that information from that list where we extracted the information. And I just go ahead and sort by newest. Here's that document we just created for Christie. And again, here it is. That's just a regular Word document that someone can review, they can edit, they can modify. And that's basically the scenario. So I've been seeing a bunch of questions popping up in the chat. Adrian?
Steve and Freddie have been doing an excellent job of answering most of them as we go. I do think we have an open question. Catherine is asking, can you see who has approved the document in the version history?
Can we see who's approved the doc? So in the version history itself, let me go back to the document library. So I look at my service agreements. And I look at just change my view here to be list view. Right now, the way that I built the workflow is I'm just running the workflow under the context of me. The workflow itself could run under a system account. And if you wanted to, you could take the approver that approved it inside of the workflow, and you could write that information over to a column that's in the list. And then that information would be inside of it. You're not going to see it with the way that I implemented it, but you could see, if I look at the flow history as well, you should be able to see inside of here some of the information from the flow execution. So short answer is you could do it, but it's not based on the way that I implemented the workflow, but it definitely is possible to do that if that's something you want to do. And I think it's a great idea.
Similar question from Tracy. Does the approval info get attached to the document in SharePoint?
Not by default,
Not by default.
but it could be as part of a step in the workflow, just like how I write out updating the status of the item. I could just as easily grab the approver or any other pieces of information from the workflow and just write those back as attributes to the list, or the document library rather, as pieces of metadata.
I have another question real quick, and then we'll let you move on. A question from Lucy. To be able to take the Power Platform and SharePoint beyond out of the box, what languages would one need to know? Like to be able to customize approval flows or adaptive cards?
Yeah, so by languages, I'm assuming we mean programming languages as opposed to English versus French versus Spanish. Power Automate is really targeted at what we call a citizen developer. So it doesn't need to be a pro developer that necessarily needs to know C# or Visual Basic or all the other languages that are out there. Some of the things are easier than others. So for some things like the adaptive card that I posted, you do need to understand a little bit of JSON, but we are working to do more with adaptive cards to make it easier to build cards without necessarily having to understand syntax for things like JSON. But really the target audience is someone that might be comfortable building Excel macros or things that are traditionally inside of SharePoint applications, or people that might have been InfoPath developers or Access developers or SharePoint designer workflow people. It does not necessarily have to be a quote unquote pro developer. That being said, we do see a lot of companies doing what we call fusion development teams, where there might be some people that are more business oriented that work on certain tasks, and then other people that are more pro dev that might work on connectors or components or other things that a citizen developer might consume in a workflow, or Power App for that matter.
Great, awesome, thank you.
Thanks all. Thanks for making this interactive too. So as we go to wrap up, I know we have about 10 minutes left here, maybe a little bit less. I wanted to talk a little bit about roadmap. So as I mentioned, we're super excited about not just what SharePoint Syntex has been doing, about the announcements yesterday around Microsoft Syntex. So things that are available today in the enhanced category is what I showed you, working with an unstructured document processing model. So that's that contract example. The content assembly that I showed you, working with structured documents. Those are those invoices, those purchase orders. Things that are coming soon, and again, I know soon is relative, are things around the annotations, working more free-form document processing models, more pre-built models beyond things like expenses, the ability to do some more tagging of taxonomy. And coming in 2023, you'll see some of that transcription and summarization aspects that I mentioned earlier, more of the language translation. So this is the take a document or a group of documents, translate them maybe from French to English or vice versa, more around image tagging and optical character recognition as well. From a Connect perspective, certainly the content querying and the integration with Microsoft Search has been there. More and more work we'll do around certainly templates, things like contract management and model types. And I didn't show this, but I'll just kind of flash it real quick. We do have a pre-built site template for contracts management. That's part of the SharePoint lookbook templates, if you've looked at that. And again, this is not meant to be a contract management solution, but it has some really great common examples to give you a bit of the art of the possible around how you might leverage Syntex around a contract management example as well. So going back here, doing a bit more around advanced search scenarios, electronic signatures I showed you earlier, not just the Microsoft native signature solution, the signatures with partners like Adobe and DocuSign. And then from the management perspective, certainly, as I showed you, the ability to leverage a Syntex model to assign an information protection label or a retention label. You'll see more announced soon around advanced security. And as I mentioned at the outset, more around the automated backup, restore, archiving scenario for kind of those cold storage. Again, archiving certain things from tier 1 storage in SharePoint to, again, somewhere else, as well as looking at those ransomware scenarios where content might need to be preserved beyond just the single stage or second stage recycle bin. Right back. Now, if you're just getting started with Syntex, I know a few of you said you've been working with Syntex. I put out a blog post a while ago that talked about what was Project Cortex, and initially became SharePoint Syntex and Viva Topics. So that's a blog post that's still out there with screenshots and examples. The contract management example that I just showed you, that, as I mentioned, is actually a free accelerator that a number of folks at Microsoft created, published. There's some sample models that exist out on GitHub with sample documents for you to train the models in a similar way as I did. And then you can extend it, just like how I extended mine to go ahead and do things around document assembly. There's also a new site that was launched yesterday around getting started with Syntex, which has some great adoption resources, training resources, links to roadmap, and things like that as well. So I'll just kind of quickly flash those up. This is the Getting Started with Microsoft Syntex site that I mentioned, which again, great for learning more, not just about SharePoint Syntex, but some of the new announcements we made yesterday around enhancing, connecting, and managing content with Syntex. Here's that blog post that I created as an example. And then here is that contract management solution that some of our colleagues created, again, about a year or so ago. Walks you through step-by-step how to set up a lot of what I showed you, links out to sample models, sample documents to train the models. And then here lastly is that SharePoint lookbook site template that if you wanted to create a sample contract management site template, here's where you leverage the lookbook to create that as a sample site in your environment.
Before you move, Chris, is it possible to take the link to this page and the one right before it and share it in the chat?
Yeah, I can put those in the chat after. The other thing is that I am going to put these slides out later today, out on my LinkedIn profile and Twitter. So if you want to just grab the slides from there, I'll do that as well. But I can grab the links after and put them back in the chat. I know that you probably move into your next session after this and may not have access to the chat history when you drop, but I will get these slides out if you follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Again, I'll put my slide up at the end. But I wanted to save the last 3 minutes for any additional Q&A that either Steve or Freddie or Ajay have not had a chance to answer. And here's my contact info. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you want to check out my blog, or if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, here's where you'll be able to get the slides. That'll have the links later today. So with that, I'll pause, take a breath. 3 whole minutes left for additional questions or feedback. So I'll open the floor.
We have a question from Giorgio asking about how does Syntex and Purview, how would Syntex and Purview work efficiently in a global organization? I thought I had another Giorgio question.
Yeah, well, I'll take that one to start. So Microsoft Purview, really the compliance capabilities in Microsoft 365, that things like information protection labels, as well as data classification and retention labels. Those are the foundation for when I was inside of Syntex here, and I was looking at the model. When I clicked on the sensitivity label or the retention label, these are coming from Purview. So we're not creating anything different here. Syntex is leveraging existing sensitivity labels that you created in Microsoft Information Protection in Purview, or existing retention labels that you created in Purview as well. So it's kind of a quote unquote better together, where you create the labels in Purview and then you can apply them to a model, and then Syntex can automatically identify documents that will assign that content type, that model to, which will then apply the sensitivity label or retention label to it. So great question, Sergio. Anything else?
Laurie's asking if you're aware of any limitations encountered in some customers' environments.
It's kind of a very, very general question. So the typical ones that we might see are around having an appropriate set of data for training. That's been the biggest one that I found is identifying, usually it's 5 to 10 documents, but having a good representation of the different documents. When you're using the forms processing with AI Builder, you can create different collections of documents. So having some standardization around your invoices, your purchase orders is a key thing. And then having negative examples, and then going back on a regular basis and reviewing the model and making sure that it's still accurate, that it's still tuned, going back and potentially retraining the model. A nice thing with Syntex is that once documents are actually created, or tagged rather, if I go in here to my services agreements and I look at this, and I go to my list view real quick, assume that this was, I can go ahead and actually reclassify and run the model again against it. So if I wanted to reclassify things, I can do that. I also can, not that I would expose this to an end user, I can actually see how confident Syntex was when it actually applied the model as one. Again, that might be feedback that maybe I need to do some retraining of the model as well. So with that, I know we're right at time here. Really appreciate you attending Ignite this week. Thank you for choosing this session. I know there's a number of sessions that were there. And thanks for being so engaged. And again, Adrian, thanks for helping me here in the room. Ajay and Steve and Freddie, thanks for helping out online. And enjoy the rest of Ignite.